up today on this very monumental and exciting first day of Act 636 going into effect today. For those of you who may not be familiar with me, I'm Consuela Gaines. I'm the community organizer for the Lafayette chapter of Vote, Voice of the Experience. And we put this together pretty much to inform people about what's taking place today with Act 636, with formerly incarcerated people being able to register to vote. Over there is my co-worker, Ms. Kelly Garrett. She is our policy counsel. Also, she's on the our different side of the organization for Voters Organized to Educate. And she'll tell you more about who she is and what her involvement is with Vote. And I just thank you and I welcome all of you for coming out today. Okay?
Hi guys, I'm sorry. I apologize. So I have to just say I am so happy that this day has come. And quite honestly, I really didn't know what to expect with actually going through the process and registering individuals for this Act 636. But the minute I got out there and met some gentlemen that were so eager to register to vote, literally I had to keep my tears in. Because it was just so humbling to know that a right and not a privilege has been stripped from an individual, and it's so challenging and difficult to get that right back. And after years and years and years of fighting to get this right back, we finally got it back. So I am ecstatic beyond belief about that. So I hope you guys grab something to eat. We did have some flyers in the back as well as an informational sheet that does talk about Act 636 and what exactly it entails. And so I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys know, but I'm gonna go through the specifics of that. So Act 636, prior to today, a person that has been convicted of a felony, convicted, not arrested, but convicted of a felony, essentially lost their voting rights until the complete imprisonment sentence has been completed. And that means that if a person was convicted, let's say, of a drug charge and was given 20 years, and they did 10 years in prison and the remaining 10 years was on parole, the remaining 10 years that person is on parole, they could not vote. And a lot of times people are on parole for a lifetime, years beyond their years of actually being living. So it was a huge monumental step to get a bipartisan bill that was passed last session after 3 times through the legislation in that one session. It was the bill that wouldn't die. It was the bill that kept going. And it passed bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, both sides voted to pass this bill, and it was enacted today. And so now, even if that same person that has been convicted of a drug felony and was given 20 years and they did 10 years in jail and 10 years on parole, if they do the 10 years in jail and 5 years later they have not been incarcerated again on a felony, then they will regain their rights to vote. And we have a quick little video that shows this cute little video that was created by our members over at Vote, which is in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and now here in Lafayette and Shreveport. So this cute little video that we'll go over that will completely explain the bill. So let's get to that video. Let's see if I can click on what.
So let's start with the problem. In the U.S., we have 2.2 which is usually a place to go before a conviction, or prison, which is usually a place you go after a conviction. We have an additional 4.4 million people on either probation, which is a sentence served in the community that involves no prison time, or parole, which is a sentence served in the community after some amount of prison time. That 6.6 million people, at least 5 million more than anywhere else in the world. And Louisiana, where we located, incarcerate more people than any of the other 49 states in the country. This is a huge problem. Another big problem is that many of these 4.4 million people lose their voting rights after being incarcerated. This is called disenfranchisement, and it is a big deal because when the people can't vote, they can't elect the leaders who have our best interests in mind. But luckily, not all people who have a record lose their voting rights, and each state gets to decide how that works. That's where we come in, to tell you who can vote and when they can vote in Louisiana. So, say you're like Mr. Free here. Mr. Free just got out of the local jail on bail. He's waiting for his trial. Can he vote? Yes. And not only that, but all his friends who are in jail awaiting trial can vote too, because they have what's known as the presumption of innocence. In other words, they haven't been convicted of anything yet. So, Mr. Free has a friend in jail who was charged with a misdemeanor, which usually means a sentence of 1 year or less. Can he vote? Yes. Misdemeanors have no impact on voting rights anywhere, ever. That means all of these people can write to the Secretary of State office from inside the jail and ask for a registration form and absentee ballot for the next and any future elections. Okay, so let's say Mr. Free just got out of prison instead of jail. He was given a felony sentence of 20 years in prison, and after serving 10 of those years, he was granted parole. Can he vote right now? Unfortunately, no. But once he finished the first 5 years of his 10-year parole, he can. In other words, anyone who has been on parole with no issues for at least 5 years or more can vote. Okay, so what about Mr. Justice down the block, who's been out for 30 years? Can he vote? Yes, he can. What about Miss Love, who finished her probation time just last week? Can she vote? Yes, she can vote. As soon as anyone finished their sentence, whether that was yesterday or 25 years ago, they're good to go. In other words, they can all vote. What about Mr. Powell, who's still on probation right now? If a judge gives him a violation, which then leads to a new conviction, and then that new conviction puts him back in prison, then no, he cannot vote. But as long as none of that happens and he stays on probation with no new conviction, then yes, he can vote too. Remember, even if you have your right to vote, you may need some documents like discharge papers from the Department of Correction, official DOC papers about your probation or parole status, and a valid identification card. We are here to help you. Vote is an organization started by and made for currently and formerly incarcerated people and their families. Contact us today. Together, we can end mass incarceration.
That gave a good 5 to 6 minute overview on what Act 636 is. And so if you haven't picked up one of these, especially if you are a community leader that does voter registrations, things like that, I highly encourage you to pick one. It's front and back. The back of it has actually the bullet points on actually who can register and what the process is to register them. And I'm so excited that we actually registered a few Act 636 individuals that this act really applies to, and it was, we have them here in the building. So they will actually share some of their experiences as well with what that process was like. But before we get there, I want to introduce some very important people that are actually in the building and that helped to sponsor this event for us today. We have Representative Terry Landry here with us, and if you would like to say a few words, you definitely can.
Doesn't matter if I like to. I'm a politician. I'm not going to pass an opportunity up to speak. I want to say it's a good day for people and especially people that have been incarcerated in this state. I was fortunate enough to have served in the Criminal Justice Committee for the past 6 years. I'm no longer on that committee anymore, but it's some people's pleasure. But this criminal justice reform just didn't start with this particular initiative. It started some time ago when Don Cravens was senator, and we started to work on criminal justice reform. Adopted a model that really knew that if we didn't start addressing generational problems, that we were going to continue on a plight that found us in being number one incarcerated place in the country. This is a battle that I spent almost 30 years in law enforcement, and swore an oath. Felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do. When I stepped away from it, I realized that it was disenfranchising people, some of it purposely, and most of the people looked like me. And I realized that there was a profit in pain and suffering, and particularly incarceration. And as you were playing the video, I was trying to figure out what correlation it is for a crime, some crimes, that just allow people not to vote. Where did that come from, and who was it intended for? Was it intended for criminals, or was it intended to disenfranchise the people? I suggest it was the latter. Same thing with the unanimous jury. That was a Jim Crow era piece of legislation that was in our Constitution. A big hurdle that we just overcame. The only thing I want to say today is this is a victory. This is a small victory. But it's not going to be worth any frustration, anxieties, the pressures, because this bill has been presented for the past 5-6 years by Representative Pat Smith. This bill is not, it just didn't come up in the office this past year. It has been brought time and time again. And finally, through some negotiating, we were able to get this initiative passed. But the most important thing that I need to emphasize today, this is worth nothing if you don't go vote.
Yes, sir.
If you don't go vote, you've wasted a lot of people's time, energies, blood, sweat, and tears. There are people who stand in line for days to vote, and we take it for granted. And the fact that your vote doesn't count is nonsense.
quote President Obama, elections matter. They matter. And if you don't think they matter, continue doing what we're doing now and don't vote. So, again, thanks to both and their efforts and the advocacy that they presented to give us the tools and the energies to pass this piece of legislation. But this is a marathon and not a sprint. There's a lot more to do as it relates to this over-incarceration, this disenfranchisement of our people, and us knowing the facts and getting engaged in these elections. These elections are not about popularity, they're about people who represent you. I have a piece of legislation, again, it's the third year, on prohibition of death penalty. I will bring it again. I will bring it again, and hopefully, one day, we'll get there. The numbers, the statistics are glaring. One group of people, death penalty is just for us, poor people. You're rich, got money, you want a black OJ. You're poor, disenfranchised, you wind up executed. So this is just a small battle. Again, I applaud both and appreciate their advocacy. I thank all of you. But again, remember, go get somebody, get them registered, and on election day, show up and show out. Thank you.
We also have an important person in the room. We have Attorney Marcus Bryant that's in the room. Would you like to say a few words?
It's very good, Mr. Taylor. I think, good morning, Marcus Bryant. I'm a local attorney and also the president of Omega Psi Phi. So we deal with a lot of voter registration, we do a lot of community events. But seeing this legislation as an attorney is kind of scary because of the part in the issues in the statute that talk about if you have no issues while you're on parole, and you have no issues while you're on probation. So if the statute was intended to disenfranchise people and to keep voters out, you can always have that constant pull and that constant push for issues to be created while a person is on probation and issues to be created while a person is paroling in order to interfere with the 5-year period, right? So it's still going to take a constant fight by attorneys, people involved with criminal law, judges panels, minority judges, judges for justice, and making sure that those issues don't block somebody from voting when their rights have been restored and now they're in here for not changing their address for parole, right? Or not coming up with the $35 and they're having an issue, right? Now their voting right does what? Start over their 5-year period? So I think all those issues gonna come up for criminal lawyers, for people fighting for justice, for community activists, and people that's gonna have to create the formularies necessary for people to go and register to vote or go and argue about why their voting rights have been terminated after they were restored. So thank y'all. This is great also. It definitely puts a lot of obligation on community groups, fraternities, sororities, and all those groups that help with voters registration and making sure that your community and your local barbershops and your different places have the forms that's necessary and the education that's necessary for their clients to have what's necessary to get their right to vote. So, thank you.
I have a quick question, Mr. Attorney. These issues that you're talking about, do they have to be brought back in front of the legislators to get corrected, or what?
You see, when you see the word for a lawyer, when we see a word called issues, you have no issues, and it's not specifically defined, right? And it's vague. It takes the oppressor and the person who still believes that this law should have never took place, that has an elected position or is in probation and parole or is anywhere, the ability to create an issue, right? And they know and they're well aware that the law passed and it's gonna put 40,000 people back into the electorate system that have a desire and a need to go vote to show that this was not in vain, right? So the only thing they have to do is create an issue. Because it just says
But
issue.
that has to be brought back
I
in
don't
front of the
know.
legislature.
That's things that's gonna have to be worked out, but I think it's gonna be a constant
It has to be
fight.
tweaked.
Yeah.
And I think
There's
it's gonna
been tweaks
be.
about the statute because, like Mark says, from our perspective, what classifies the issue? The problem is, if the statute is not tweaked to address those issues and tell you to do A, B, and C.
Right.
But it's no different than with criminal law, when we
Right.
see issues in the statute and we challenge it, it's the same process.
And Mr. Gibbs is here, he's a former Deputy Secretary of Corrections, and I think the legislature a couple of years ago addressed technical violations.
That's correct, that's correct.
And I
That's
think the
correct.
technical violations,
Don't
which is the
count.
vagueness,
Yes, it was
it doesn't
vague,
matter,
that's
you
right.
can't
So
revoke
that's
a
what we
person
want.
for parole.
Right, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So
But you're right though, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and so it'd be making it align with particular violations,
Right.
more than likely, so that they won't be able to use it to get them back into jail as a technicality.
And I think it's gonna take all this movement.
Yes.
Because every year they're gonna fight to repeal it, right?
Yes.
Hey, we had more people after 5 years went back into jail. We did all this movement, we did all this registration, we did all this clogging up at the Office of Voters Registration. Now these guys are back in jail. Now these guys are back, violating their parole. Okay, we had 40,000 people to register to vote, 40,000 restored. 5,000 went and registered to vote. So what is this fight about, right? Every year, whoever has an intent to try to fight it is going to revisit it and going to look at the things that's going on and whether we really want the right to vote and whether we really want to fight and use our right to vote.
And it's education and empowerment.
Right. So we gotta still go, and it's still a fight for the rest of our life, right? If we wanted to stay in the family. Right. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brian, very true, because, the Secretary of State, he made it clear that, there are still gonna have to be some amendments to this particular act, because the process of the registering, it didn't change, because that wasn't included in the proposed bill. So it's pretty much still the same, and they're going to have to go in and, like you say, tweak some things, and hopefully they don't try to wipe it completely out, which we know that they would prefer to do. Some of them would prefer to just wipe it completely out, but it's going to take grassroots organizations and people who this directly impacts to make sure that that doesn't happen in the coming legislations. So, you're absolutely correct about that. And like Kelly said earlier, we met with some guys over at the Office of Probation and Parole who, this law affects directly. And it was a humbling experience for me too, because just in a few years, I'll be one of those people too. Because I'm a formerly incarcerated person, but I've only been out of prison for 2 years. And so that means I have 3 more years before I'll be able to register to vote. So hopefully by then, all of these kinks and hiccups will be made smoothly for me to be able to register at an easier rate than these guys had to go through today. And I would just like to ask Mr. Stanley, would you like to share your story, your experience with us, and what it means to you today to be able to register to vote for the first time?
Well, I'm happy to be here. First, I want to give my obedience to God, because without Him, it's nothing. So, by being 23 years being locked up, couldn't vote. I used to watch my wife go and vote. Now, we can do it as a pair. Yeah. And I'm happy for this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Also, we have Mr. Lee.
I have a
Mr.
question
Fox.
for Mr. Terry. Maybe someone could correct me what I was looking at in the film about people that was incarcerated on a minor offense, or even if it's a felony, but they haven't got convicted and they actually get a form to register to vote, how would they be able to vote being incarcerated? So that's not applied to, I mean, I understand it's absentee, but I have no knowledge that it's happening here in the parish jail.
Well, it's not gonna happen, but the legislature has pushed the sheriffs about the people's right on pre-conviction incarceration. You know, bail is another big deal that's getting ready to come up, because we also believe that's a Jim Crow type situation where people are, sometimes in most cases, misdemeanors do more time waiting for trial before the sentence is. I mean, they just don't have the money, so they're locked up. But your conviction, or your losing your right to vote comes after conviction, not prior to conviction. And the way the system works sometimes it's years before people can go to trial. Let me just point out one other thing, and I listen to the discussion. The NRA, the powerful NRA, has been able to pass legislation where there's some crimes that you can get your right to go back and hunt.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so they have all these rights that you have to vote. I was chairing with Kelly this morning, and some things are glaring. I think everybody knows where the registrar of voters office, but it's probably the most remote place in parish government. That's a message. That is a message. It's a message for people who want to have access to register online and all of the. It's a message. There'll be neon signs saying where you can vote or where you register to vote.
Amen. So how can we push this issue when it comes around election, that the people that's just sitting out in jail waiting for trial and giving them an opportunity to?
Everybody knows somebody that's locked up. Everybody has somebody that is a loved one that is locked up. I suggest that you get the mail-in ballot, or get they call it absentee ballot or something. You sign the affidavit that you send it in. And they have to give you access.
That's right. And it's getting the sheriff to be responsible to facilitate it out to them.
That's my point.
Because they don't know that they can do that.
We didn't hear you, Ms. Gallagher.
I said it's getting access
Right.
to the sheriff and making him responsible to get that information to those inmates because they don't know.
No, yeah.
A lot of them don't know they can do it.
I still didn't hear you. I'm doing this for a point, okay?
Yeah.
The point is, it's being said to certain individuals, but it's not being acted upon or being
That's
done.
right. Even the lawyers can bring it in for them. If you got a client, you can bring it in as a lawyer, because I can go in as a lawyer.
Yes, ma'am.
But otherwise, they will not have access to it because they don't know.
Thank you.
And so if they don't know, they won't know to request it from the Secretary of State. They won't know that I have the right to vote while I'm sitting here for months. And those people can impact change. They just don't know.
Our leadership's study saying.
They don't know.
You don't have no rights.
Well, I think what the glaring part of this whole thing is that, she mentioned the Secretary of State. They underestimated how many people this was going to affect. I think they were estimating somewhere around 6,000 to 7,000 people. When they saw 40,000 people and believed that those people are going to vote in a certain party affiliation, they panicked. And now they're looking for an opportunity to try to figure out how they can brace for what's going to happen. There's a Secretary of State race coming up. Again, he's up for re-election. You know, we talked about the sheriff's not giving access. There's a sheriff race coming up pretty soon, within the next several months. Elections matter. Elections matter. And if we stay complacent and satisfied, we're going to keep getting the same results. And you need to know who are the people who are standing in the way. Redistricting is coming. It's a big deal. People are not talking about it.
Yes.
Redistricting is coming, and the Republicans, God bless whoever's a Republican, but they're plotting. And their plot is to how to oppress the minority vote. Because when we vote, we usually get it right. It's when we stay home, we don't get it right. We get
Be scared.
elected.
Bo, you had something
I was gonna say that a lot of these parish jails, their mailroom personnel is under direct orders to block any of that type of mail coming to you. They'll even make you sign a piece of paper saying I will allow that to be returned to sender. They won't even let you go. So therein lies another problem, is your local parish jails blocking that mail.
And like they said, about people not knowing, because the majority of people, well, a couple of people who registered to vote today have been off the paper for 20 plus years and didn't know they could have registered years ago. But they didn't know, they weren't informed. So you have to wonder who was responsible for informing these individuals. Was it Department of Corrections? Was it the Secretary of State? Whose responsibility? Now, I've heard Department of Corrections say when a person is released off of probation or parole, that somehow in there, in the letter that they send to them, they include you're eligible to vote. Obviously, when did you start sending this out?
It's
Because too many
sometimes it's on
people.
the first offender pardon letter.
Mhm.
But you got, it's buried in.
Buried, yeah.
And if you're a first offender and you can get a pardon, you get a letter and the inmates will have it when they're released and they'll say, I'm first offender, but they don't, all they think about is, I'm a first offender and look, Ms. Garrett, look what I could get, but they don't see, you have the right to vote.
Right.
Because we've registered some of them that didn't know, because it's buried in there. It's not bold like first offender pardon. That's what they're looking for.
Exactly.
And as Gary is so right, in a many occasion also, prior to this law, even if you was a third offender and your conviction was 7 years ago and you're off of paper, you was eligible to vote. You could register and vote.
Yes.
Right, and this one's the first offender pardon is absolutely correct. As you state, anyone, once they're released from supervision, parole or probation, they are eligible to vote.
Wouldn't send
The
you a
only thing they
conviction.
have on their letter is that you don't have the right to own, possess, to carry a firearm if that offense is a crime of violence of some sort.
Correct. But your conviction have to have been 7 years.
I'm not sure about the
I'm
7
positive.
years.
I would like to know who's responsible for educating at least the public defenders. I mean, a private attorney, I could see we have really no control over because it's a private business. But a public defender is there to serve the state and serve the inmates that can't afford an attorney. Do the public defenders know, and are they telling these inmates that this is a possibility that, you know, I mean, do they, I don't want to use the word care because I know their case overload is ridiculous, but they should be required to explain this process to them.
I'm not gonna speak for law, but the public defenders don't have a responsibility of post-conviction responsibility. It's all, in defense of the attorneys, and let me defend the public defenders. They're funded by fees and fines. The capital case, the murder cases, is where all the money is being sucked out. There are some public defender's office that are almost have to file a lawsuit in order to get fundings. The district attorneys fight everything in terms of fundings for the public defenders, so it's not their responsibility on post-convictions. It's their job is
Well, I wasn't trying to pick on them, I was just thinking that this would be
Yeah.
something that they could tell
yeah,
as they're
yeah.
defending.
They're trying to get them off.
Yeah.
They're trying to get them off.
Can work with community service people, community groups to create some kind of voting rights worksheet or voting rights sheet that can be provided to the Indigent Defender Board, that they make a part of their interview process. When you're appointed a Indigent Defender, they have like a welcome packet. I'm your attorney, this is your deal, if you need to schedule an interview, call this number, this is where the office is located, call. And they could maybe include that sheet in there on how to vote or how to request an absentee ballot. And now they don't have to deal with it daily. Like you said, they don't have to, they're dealing with, one person might be dealing with 200 people. right? People always fussing and fighting about, I never saw my attorney, I went to court, I was in jail 6 months, no attorney came to see me. So they have that one-time deal when they may meet their attorney, right? Before they may not see them for another 6 months or 5 months, or till they finally get that court date to understand if they're gonna plead or take whatever penalty, right? They could give them a sheet, if they'll create a sheet, and maybe give it to the county defender office and ask them to include it in their interview or their first packet or their first information they give. Because person may relocate, person may have got picked up here and now they're going to Calcasieu or now they're going somewhere else because they have some kind of holds on them and they still haven't been convicted. That don't mean their rights to vote have been taken away, but now they up north because they got a ticket that they're getting paid, and now, or some other deal they got into up there and they got shipped off. So by the time they receive the information from the clerk of court, it's not even going to the jail where they actually located.
Well, with the process here in parish, because I served as a defender for many, many years, it probably is better from the onset when they do their intake with the public defender's office before they get assigned to a defender.
Right.
Because at that point, they're collecting data to determine whether or not they should pay some fees to the public defender service.
Right.
So if they do it when they're doing their intake, that's probably the better time to
Can
catch
you just
them.
reach out to maybe a corporation or us lawyers and everything else and say, hey, we need money to print out 500 colored copies. This is your voting rights to give to the Indigent Defender Board to say, put this in your intake form. As part of the intake process, give them their right to vote. Right now, we know that every person that has been charged with a crime that is going through the Indigent Defender, which is probably 80% of defendants, 90% of defendants, have their sheet and know and have been given some form of how to register to vote and how to get an absentee ballot if they're in jail at the time that elections are coming up. Right?
I have a question. Hey, when you applied for your driving license, don't they have a form asking you if you want to register to vote at the time? Or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But most of the people saying no, they ignoring it.
Yeah. But like y'all was saying, I think there needs to be a notification at intake and at them re-entering, at exiting. Correct.
And I think vote is gonna be our job. Why? Because those dates change.
Right.
For an October election, the time period for getting absentee voting is a different thing. For a May election or a November election, that form is gonna be a constant change. Don't expect our Indigent Defender Board, we're dealing with 1 million things, to update that form with new information, with new deadlines and dates. Does that form change? Probably every 90 days, right? On deadlines and dates for registering to vote.
Yeah.
Absentee vote, for sure, absentee vote, right?
But access where to go could be the general information.
Right, but those deadlines for doing it, which is we always get beat on deadlines.
Yeah.
You wanna speak about being beat, we are always beaten on, you have 90 days to do this, 60 days to do this, you have to do this by this date, and that date passed, and then it don't matter if you did it or not because you passed the deadline, right?
Yeah, so it's more than likely, somebody asks, well, whose responsibility will it be? It's more than likely going to be upon the grassroots organizations to get this job done, just as it has been to get a lot of these jobs done. So, collectively, it's gonna take an effort of concerned citizens and people who know the injustice that takes place, and we can pretty much pinpoint it and see it before it even happens, so it's gonna take people like us to get in contact with the right service providers or whatever organization or office that we need to get in contact with to put something in place to alleviate some of these problems and hiccups that we face.
Louisiana is big on the reentry programs themselves. And some of the reentry programs like Angola is that you're there for 2 years or 3 years in lieu of doing an actual prison sentence via the judge sentencing you to this program, so you're not technically convicted. The mentors that are in these programs that are over these guys and girls could easily spread this message to them about their voting rights as part of their curriculum.
Yeah, because they do have it in the women's facility too, the reentry programs. So there are ways that this information can get out to people who it applies to. So, like I said, it's just gonna take a collective effort. I know it's something that Vote is gonna be trying to make sure that we monitor and that we get implemented at whatever level that we have to. We'll get the job done one way or the other, because our organization, like I said, they've been on this for years. This isn't something that just took place. They've been on this for years. Our founder, Norris Henderson, spent 27 years at Angola, and that's where Vote was formed. With him and Chico Yancey, they came up with the idea of Vote within the prison. And so it's gonna take our work, all of us. I think I had one other guy, Mr. Lee, who today got registered to vote. And could you just share your experience with us and let us know?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm A.K. Ronald George, namely Edward Gallion. And a lot of people been trying to get me to vote. And I ignore that. I said, who gonna vote for me then if I go vote for them? I said that for many years. Went back to prison. Then I kept thinking, I'm hurting myself. I'm not hurting nobody but myself. So, Mr. Kenner, he called me on the phone. He said, you want to vote? I said, I can't vote. I'm a convict. I can't vote for nobody. He said, yeah, you can vote. So he told me, Mr. Zeno then was going to be there. I said, well, I started thinking, my vote might can help somebody get in office that I want to put in there, instead of asking, man, why you vote for him? Why you vote for this person?
Thank you so much. And I was speaking with people today, and that's the thing, we just have to educate. We have to educate our people as to why it's so important and why we need to vote. Okay.
Unfortunately, I wouldn't have said anything.
I know, that's why I didn't even call your name.
Yeah, but this meeting, and I think it got the best of me. And first of all, I want to thank Kendall for calling me up last night and telling me about this, and I say to myself, yeah, you know what I'm saying? You don't violate the law no more. You might make a change in somebody's life, you know, by voting. So I said, yeah, I'm gonna meet you there. I'm gonna meet you there tomorrow, you know. And I just want to thank him for sharing this with me. And now I'm a registered voter now.
Yes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
How you doing?
My name is Anthony Bruce. I've been out 12 years from Angola, and I'm very familiar with Mr. Yancey, Chico Yancey, and also the founder, Norris Henderson. They're some good brothers of mine. I was up in that plaque with them as well, and I've always been an advocate, you know, for voters' rights. I've done 20 years. We always up in the same dormitory, shared our arms, meals, and everything. I've been waiting a very long time for this. I'm a homeowner, thinking about fixing to open up my own business. I've been married 17 years. My anniversary just passed on February 15th. I don't play that Facebook, or social media, but my wife does. She's a school teacher here when I was here for 20 years. I met her up in Angola. And this day here means so much to me. I didn't vote, I didn't register yet. When I leave here, I'm going straight to parole and probation.
Amen.
I'm getting my vote.
Right.
Because I know my vote matters.
Yeah, right.
And I've always wanted to meet this gentleman right here personally. I haven't always seen him on TV. And I commend everybody, you know, that's continuing to follow through with this here, because it means a lot to everybody in the country. My vote matters. It does matter. It could change things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm gonna spread the news even more, and I'm fixing to get together with Norris and Chico. I'm fixing to drive right out to them. My wife and I vote. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you. ripple effect that we want to see. You know, we want to see a wildfire. We talk about the wildfires in California that just burn acres, and you know, we want to see that in masses of people wanting and desiring to register to vote, whether they're formerly incarcerated persons or not. It doesn't matter. Of course, we're focusing on the formerly incarcerated, but I welcome everybody. If a person has never been registered to vote, hey, now is the time, because it's serious and we have to educate. And we'll be doing different seminars and different voter registration throughout Lafayette and surrounding areas, and educating our people on the importance of registering to vote, but more so getting out and actually voting. Yes, sir.
And I've been working with some attorneys, Marcus, and some people in Iberia Parish on expungement. We're going to be doing some expungement seminars and helping people to get some expungement and doing some pre-screening and that type. So that's another critical point of this process. And let me just say this: a little bit I know about history. Change has never come from the people in power. It never comes from the people in power. It comes from the grassroots.
Very quick comment. I just want to say, after working in correction for almost 34 years.
Good brother. Good brother.
Toward the tail end of my career, I had the chance to get involved with reentry, reforming our criminal justice system. And we made some scratches and here and there. But one of the great things that happened to me along the way, I was able to meet Chico Yancey and Norris Henderson. And I began to walk and talk with Chico and Norris. And it helped me to bring forth policies and procedures that would help individuals that were incarcerated as well as individuals on probation and parole. This gentleman just spoke about reentry. Now, for me, this is the ultimate in reentry. When a person that has been formerly incarcerated or under probation and parole now has a chance to really fully be a citizen of this United States of America again by exercising that most sacred right to vote. So I applaud you guys for going out and voting. And the ones that plan on registering, I applaud you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Prejean. I represent an organization called Move the Mindset. There's some of you may recognize me. I'm one of the folks who are pushing to move the Jim Crow statue from downtown Lafayette to a museum. But I'm not going to talk with you about the statue. There are several programs our organization is involved in, and all of which has to do with teaching the history of black people in the state of Louisiana, and more specifically, the history of blacks in Lafayette, the civil rights history of blacks. Representative Landry just made the statement that it's always the grassroots people who gets things done, the people in power don't. I'd like to provide you a short history of voter suppression that has taken place throughout years and resulted in what exists today. There are many people here today who are much more knowledgeable about current events as it relates to black people voting. But I could take you back in history and I hope by doing so, it will motivate you and help you to understand why voting is so important today. In 1860, 50% of the people in Lafayette were black people. 50%. And all 50, less than 10% of that 50% were slaves. So they could not vote. Also in 1860, Louisiana, including Lafayette, would not allow Abraham Lincoln to be on the presidential ticket in the state of Louisiana because he favored freeing the slaves, which meant you would have the right to vote. You would have the right to own property. You would have the right to serve on juries. You would have the right to sue white people. You would have the right of every other American citizen. So they would not put Abraham Lincoln on the ballot. Nobody in the state of Louisiana, a total of 10 of the 11 southern states, did not put him on the ballot. From 1861 to 1865, the Civil War took place. It wasn't until 1865 that black people earned the right to vote like everybody else. That right to vote lasted for 12 years until 1877, when Reconstruction took place. At that time, the federal troops who had declared martial law were moved out, and the regular people who lived in communities took over city and state government again. That is when the Jim Crow laws came into force in full strength. Black people's right to vote was declined for numerous reasons. If your great-great-grandfather didn't vote, you couldn't vote. If you didn't own property, you couldn't vote. In some areas, if you didn't own slaves way back then, you couldn't vote. There were all kinds of reasons why voter suppression was enforced. Following the 1877 period, other forms of slavery took place. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, which resulted in the separate but equal law, which virtually was segregation, began. The Supreme Court ruled. The marginalization of black people began to be legal at that point. And when it became legal, we were identified as inferior to the white people and the rights and privileges white people had. You couldn't sit in the same train car. You couldn't go to the same restaurants. You know, accommodations were not open to black and white equally. So voter suppression in various forms took place, all of which resulted in the kind of suppression we have been experiencing today. So now that you know that this voter suppression, which defied and denied black people to vote up until this day,